bonita, make a fly to Ibiza. You my nigga, you my chica, make a give her what to see that, what to see that. If you want lucky, rebel. Sadi Satani, machine gun. I'ma no test me, I be King Kong. Timothy Mawafa Meji, Atale Bobo. Adi, my va, my sexual. You be higher, who is your? Oh, shut up, oh, yeah, so much.
Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 2100 hours. A very good evening to you, Channel Africa viewers, listeners. A warm welcome to the Friday edition of Africa World Hour as we bring you a wrap of the day's top stories from the heart of Africa to all corners of the globe. One planet, countless stories. We bring you the stories, the voices and the perspectives that matter. I'm Tshepiso Makwetla. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a full show today. Even though it's a Friday, we would like to hear your comments. So where you are, where you're listening from, what are the conversations happening in and around you? Send us through your thoughts and your perspective on +27 63 406 9126. Let's go straight to your top stories this hour.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And we start you off with this story. South Africa's National Police Commissioner, General Fani Masemola, says illegal firearms remain a huge concern across the world. He was speaking at the 27th Interpol Regional Conference taking place in Cape Town, which wrapped up today. The high-level gathering, attended by senior law enforcement officials from across Africa and Western countries, addressed growing concerns over violent crimes in the host city. It also dealt with various forms of financial flows, money laundering in and out of countries, cyber fraud and tax evasion. Masemola says law enforcement needs to unite and fight the scourge of crime across the world.
These firearms, of course, they are manufactured across the globe and they are transshipped also across internationally. They are a tool to commit crime, and it is firearms that leave families stranded, distraught.
And over 20 suspected foreign nationals have been arrested in South Africa's Northern Cape province for contravening immigration laws. The suspects were apprehended at a construction site in Kimberley after police were tipped off about undocumented workers. Provincial police spokesman there, Mirapelo Pilani, says the suspects will appear in the Kimberley Magistrates Court soon.
A total of 21 individuals aged 18 and 46 were arrested for contravening immigration laws at construction sites in New Park and Belgravia in Kimberley following a tip-off about undocumented workers. Employers were fined for violations of immigration legislation. All arrested suspects will appear in the Kimberley Magistrate Court while investigation continues.
A Kenyan official says there are fears that a doomsday cult suspected of causing the deaths of more than 400 people is making a comeback. The alleged leader, Paul Mackenzie, is on trial. Mackenzie was arrested last year and pleaded not guilty to manslaughter. Channel Africa News correspondent in Kenya, Alex Kiarie, says the accused allegedly told his followers that he would get to heaven more quickly than if they stopped eating?
The fact that there are no laws that legislate or rather govern faith. Most of these people who are involved in this thing were adults who made the choice to follow him thanks to his preachings. And they did it on their own, and therefore it's very, very hard for even the state to find someone to use either as an accomplice or as a witness on the same, because they did it voluntarily. And so far, the country is finding itself in a very, very tight situation in terms of litigating this issue because of such technicalities that are involved in the whole situation. And this is the reason why Mackenzie has been boldly calling for his release, because he says he never killed anybody. They joined him voluntarily.
And Rwanda has received the first group of 7 migrants deported from the United States under a bilateral agreement that could see up to 250 people sent to Kigali. While the Rwandan government says these individuals will be accommodated, provided with healthcare and offered workforce training, human rights groups have raised concerns about transparency, safeguards and the migrants' long-term well-being. Christian Rumu, Amnesty International campaigner for the Great Lakes region, has expressed grave concern over the agreement.
Our concern over this type of deals can be summarized in 2 main points. One is around the weakening of the international law. The second aspect of this particular deal is to look at what is happening across the region, the bigger picture across the region, and Rwanda's role in the conflict in Eastern DRC. So this type of deals risk to kind of overshadow Rwanda's role.
A federal judge in the United States, City of New York, has rejected an effort from Saudi Arabia to dismiss a lawsuit from the September 11 terror attack survivors and victims' families. The lawsuit is alleging that the country assisted the hijackers in the lead up to the deadliest attack on U.S. soil in history. U.S. District Judge George Daniels found the plaintiffs' claims were sufficient to allow the landmark civil case to go to trial and let their years-long legal battle to continue. The BBC's Charles Haviland has the details.
15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were Saudi. Riyadh has persistently denied any government involvement, but allegations of its complicity have persisted, and the new ruling is the culmination of years of litigation. The role of 2 Saudis then living in the US has been especially contentious. One, Omar al-Bayoumi, was a diplomat in the Saudi consulate in Los Angeles, and the plaintiffs alleged that both helped the hijackers. Judge George Daniels said official Saudi responses to the allegations were not strong, and the civil case should be allowed to go to trial.
And a federal judge in the United States, City of New York, has rejected an effort from Saudi Arabia to dismiss a lawsuit from that September 11 terror attack on survivors and victims' families, as you've just heard. Moving on, finally, Israel's military says it has declared Gaza City a combat zone as it ramps up its preparations to seize the territory's largest population zone. It also announced that it found the body of an Israeli killed in the October 7th Hamas attacks. The BBC's Yolanda Nell has more.
In Gaza City, what we've been hearing from witnesses is that in the past couple of hours there have been more intense airstrikes. Meanwhile, the Israeli military making this declaration that Gaza City was now a dangerous combat zone and that it was suspending these tactical pauses in fighting that were introduced about a month ago to get more aid in. This all seen as being part of the preparations for a bigger operation to conquer Gaza City.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
All right, we, as I mentioned, are hoping to speak to, in fact, we are scheduled to speak to a family spokesperson for the Lungu family, as the family insists that it wants the former president to be buried here in South Africa. So we hope to get more information on them, on where things stand with the Zambian government on its efforts to repatriate the body of the former president back to Zambia. So I mentioned earlier on that Interpol conference that is taking place in South Africa. So we'll tell you about it in just a minute. But just a reminder that we'd like to hear from you if you are listening to us live. We are on DSTV Audio Bouquet 802, and we are also on OpenView channel as well as the DSTV, or rather the SABC Plus app. So download that and listen to us live from there.
Nighttime radio, just the way you like it, on Channel Africa, where the night comes alive.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Binal Sport depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Now, Israel's intention to militarily take over Gaza City signals a new and dangerous phase in what the United States Secretary General Antonio Guterres has described as yet another deadly escalation. The UN chief has warned that thousands of civilians who are already exhausted and traumatized would be forced to flee yet again, plunging families into deeper peril. Guterres called for accountability for the attacks on civilians, including journalists, lamenting the atrocious treatment of Israeli hostages by Hamas, again calling for their immediate release. He also pushed back against Israel's continued settlement expansion in the West Bank in violation of international law. More from my colleague Sherwin Bryce-Pease.
With reports of dozens killed by Israeli strikes overnight in Gaza, UN officials often lamented how they were running out of words to describe the unfolding tragedy and humanitarian catastrophe. But listen to the UN chief, Antonio Guterres.
Expanded military operations in Gaza City will have devastating consequences. Hundreds of thousands of civilians, already exhausted and traumatized, would be forced to flee yet again, plunging families into even deeper peril. This must stop. At the same time, we have seen yet more unconscionable Israeli strikes, including earlier this week at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. One attack was followed by another, killing civilians, including medical personnel and journalists, who were carrying out their essential work, all with the world watching. I know so many of the reporters here, along with us, have lost their colleagues. These attacks are part of an endless catalogue of horrors. There must be accountability.
He referred to the provisional measures handed down by the International Court of Justice in January 2024 at the behest of South Africa's case, alleging genocide by Israel in Gaza, including that Israel ensure unfettered humanitarian and medical assistance to Palestinians without delay, measures that have not been implemented to the letter of the ruling.
The levels of death and destruction in Gaza are without parallel in recent times. Famine is no longer a looming possibility, it's a present-day catastrophe. People are dying from hunger. Families are being torn apart by displacement and despair. Pregnant women are facing unimaginable risks. And the systems that sustain life, food, water, healthcare, have been systematically dismantled. These are the facts on the ground. And they are the result of deliberate decisions that defy basic humanity. Israel, as the occupying power, has clear obligations. It must ensure the provision of food, water, medicine, and other essentials. It must agree to and facilitate far greater humanitarian access. It must protect civilians and civilian infrastructure. And it must end the destruction of that which is indispensable for the survival of the civilian population.
While in the West Bank, the Secretary-General warned of an alarming situation, pointing to military operations, settler violence, demolitions, and discriminatory policies driving displacement of Palestinians and deepening vulnerabilities.
The recent approval of a plan for the construction of thousands of settlements in the EU area would effectively separate the northern and southern West Bank, an existential threat to the two-state solution. I repeat, the Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, have been established and are being maintained in violation of international law. Israel must cease such actions and comply with its obligations. There is no military solution to the conflict. I appeal once again for an immediate and permanent ceasefire and fettered humanitarian access across Gaza and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Starvation of the civilian population must never be used as a method of warfare. Civilians must be protected. Humanitarian access must be unimpeded. No more excuses, no more obstacles, no more lies.
Another day, another statement amid famine and starvation. Evacuation orders, military escalation, hostages in captivity, and no clear end to this war in sight. I'm Sherwin Bryce-Pease in New York.
And we continue now with an event that took place earlier on. We said wrapped up. That is the Interpol convention that is taking place. Western Cape Police Commissioner Thembisile Phathekile saying that they are looking at strengthening bilateral relations with other countries to prevent illegal firearms from entering the country. He indicated police had seized over 800 illegal weapons since April this year. Phathekile was speaking during the 3-day International Criminal Police Organization's summit, which ended in Cape Town today. Top police officials from across Africa and partner countries in the West have been discussing ways to better tackle transnational organized crime. Andile Mbanjwa reports.
The conference served as a platform to come with creative and innovative solutions to law enforcement problems. It also dealt with various forms of financial flows, money laundering in and out of countries, cyber fraud and tax evasion, amongst other things. National Police Commissioner General Fanny Masemula says illegal firearms remain a huge concern across the world.
Illegal firearms have become a problem, and these firearms, of course, they are manufactured across the globe and they are transshipped also across internationally. They are a tool to commit crime, and it is firearms that leave families stranded, distraught, and accompanied by the scourge of drugs that is also being transshipped across the globe.
The gathering also addressed growing concerns of a violent crime in the host city. This comes as several areas on the Cape Flats have seen a surge in violent crimes and gang-related crimes over the past few months. Western Cape Police Commissioner Thembisile Phathekile says there has been a spike in shootings within the same gangs on the Cape Flats. He says they've arrested a 23-year-old man in Mitchell's Plain who was wanted for a fatal shooting outside the local magistrate's court earlier this week.
We've seen the surge, the flare on the gangs, and especially in the Muizenberg, Steenberg and Grassepass area. It normally, and even in this case, was a fight within one gang. But again, in particular in this one, the deceased and the suspect belong in the same gang. So again, this conflict within the one gang is manifesting itself into many matters.
Phathekile says they've seized about 880 illegal firearms since April.
In the Western Cape, the weapon of choice is firearms. And this week alone, 35 firearms were retrieved. And 7 of those are semi-automatic rifles, and 4 of them are AK-47s, and 2 are Uzis, and 1 is automatic rifle. Now we believe that these firearms are coming from other countries. Hence, we have the conference here, and we're talking about the transnational crimes, organized crime, the cyber crimes.
Officials have pledged to unite and fight crime across the globe. I'm Andile Mbanjwa in Cape Town.
And now we continue with some of the top stories that we have been looking at. A group of United Nations experts has urged authorities in Mali to free anti-corruption campaigner Clément Mamadou Dembélé following his incarceration for nearly 2 years. Clément Dembélé remained in detention despite a court ruling ordering his release over 4 months ago. According to UN experts, the case reflects an escalating pattern of human rights violations against members of the opposition, journalists and human rights defenders in Mali. The call follows a recent report which found that Russian private mercenary operations in that country sowed resentment within West African nations, army and military government, causing security lapses and failed to yield any mining concessions. For a look at the political landscape in Mali, we are joined now by political analyst at the Bamako University in Mali, Dr. Zoumara Diarra. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So there have been reports of clashes between armed military groups, or militia rather, and the army, with the Russian paramilitary group, the Wagner group. But there have also been attacks on civilians, including kidnappings. Has the situation stabilized, or is it getting worse?
As far as I'm concerned, the security situation in Mali is very worrying, despite of the significant efforts made by the government. When we follow developments in the situation, we saw that violence is widespread. For instance, since May, in my point of view, the situation has continued to deteriorate. Multiple terrorist attacks have been carried out against civilians and the Malian army forces, the most recent of which took place in Farabougou last week.
And we also seen the involvement of the ISGS and JNIM. Now, I read in the introduction that there seems to be growing resentment of the presence of these Russian military forces fighting alongside the Malian government. What can you tell us about that situation, and how tenuous is the situation?
So the situation in Mali, especially the political landscape, has been very, very tense since 2020, when the army took power, and even before that. The main tensions, therefore, relate to the transitional period. Recently, this period has been extending for another 5 years. Political activities and fundamental freedoms, such as freedom of opinion, expression, and the press, are also among the points of tensions in Mali at the moment.
Now, as we mentioned, that UN and human rights experts are calling for the release of Clément Mamadou. How did he find himself in the crosshairs of the military junta?
I would like to remind that Clément Dembélé is a professor at one of the University of Bamako in Mali. He is also a political leader and a well-known civil society leader in the fight against corruption in Mali, as he is a president of an association called the Platform Against Corruption and Unemployment in Mali, French acronym PCC. He was arrested in November 2023 while preparing a press conference on the electricity problems in Mali. The official reason for this arrest were death threats against the traditional president and his family in a voice message posted on social media. He has never admitted this allegation. And on early July, the judge dismissed the case, but the prosecutors appealed, and Clement Modou Dambélé remains in the prison, unfortunately.
And what is the forecast for not only his freedom, for his life? Have there been reports of torture? Is there any prospect of him being released alive or even in good health?
Sorry, say again, please.
I'm asking, what are the prospects of him being released, and is he being tortured? Is he in good health? Are there any reports of such happening?
I think it's a part of the criminal procedure. Even though I don't agree with its arrestation, but according to the criminal procedure, the prosecutor has the right to make an appeal from the decision of the judge.
So let's just talk about reforms that are required in Mali at the moment. There is a view, and no doubt this would be shared by human rights campaigners like Professor Dembele, that civil society has to be involved, has to be at the heart of the reforms that are required in Mali. As you mentioned yourself, that the military government seems to have extended its role at the helm of state. Is there any room for that given the current conditions?
In my opinion, security reforms cannot be very effective without civil society. Everyone is aware of the role played by community leaders in this field. For instance, civil society participation should be very important, particularly when the Malian government decides one day to negotiate with armed group. On one side, on the other side, as far as I'm concerned, for the moment there is no hope for civilians to have a democratically elected leader. You know, in the early July, I have to remind the Malian parliament passed a law granting the president 5 more years in office, renewable as many times as necessary until the country is completely pacified. As you know, for those familiar with the fight against terrorism, no one can predict when it can take end.
And we understand that it's not just Malians who are in danger, that the danger or the security situation is now spreading to foreign nationals. There was a case of 3 Indian nationals that were held or are being held hostage. Is there a danger of this conflict going beyond the continent to other parts of the world, given the fact that there are foreign nationals who are in Mali, and embassies are in fact being encouraged to ramp up their security?
You know, in Mali at the moment, no region has been spared from violence by armed groups. So, not even the region, Kai region, which was attacked by an army group in the early July. And the industrial unit, the governor's office, and the police station were targeted in these attacks, which took place on the same day. This doesn't mean that there is no hope for the security situation, as the Malian army forces are making considerable efforts against the terrorism. So I remain a little bit optimistic.
But what do you foresee as viable security solutions to the current situation?
As far as I'm concerned, I think the military response is very important in for fighting against terrorism, but is not enough. It's very important for me to add it the political means, so the political way. There is to negotiate with some army group. It's very important. The only military issue is not the best way for getting the peaceful period for Mali and for the Sahel. One day it will be very important to negotiate with some leaders of the army group. It's very important for me.
A very interesting comment by one of your colleagues saying that the problem is that Bamako's current strategy to tackle the armed groups, the terrorism there, is based more on theory and political maneuverings rather than localized dynamics and solutions. In your understanding, what would that mean?
It means that the only army cannot get a definitive solution for the multi-dimensional crisis that Mali and the other Sahelian countries know. It means it's necessary for those countries to develop a dialogue, a political dialogue strategies with some of the stakeholders in terms of army group. It's very important for those countries to develop the dialogue, the political dialogue with all the actors.
And just finally, do you see that dialogue being extended to ECOWAS having a role, given the friction between Mali and ECOWAS?
I don't think because the relationship between Mali and ECOWAS is very, very conflictual. So if you listen to the speech or the political speech of our authorities, it's impossible for the three countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, to come back to ECOWAS. So they created the new organization which govern the three countries. Maybe they can develop a diplomatic relationship between ECOWAS, but it's I think it is not possible at the moment for the three countries to come back to ECOWAS.
Right,
this is my point of view.
I really appreciate your time, political analyst at Bamako University in Mali. Dr. Zoumara Diarra brings the time to 26 minutes to 10.
Es-tu préoccupé par quelque chose? Es-tu passionné par les questions qui comptent? As-tu une voix qui mérite d'être entendue? Eh bien, nous avons la plateforme parfaite pour toi. Téléphone-nous ou fais-nous un WhatsApp au +27 66 408 87 42 et nous te rappellerons. Sois dans la conversation.
Salut Channel Africa, ici Beno le diamant rouge et Bina l'export depuis le Cameroun, le pays des lions. Voilà.
Sois dans la conversation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de parler, mais c'est ta chance d'exprimer ton point de vue, de partager tes opinions et de t'engager avec une communauté qui valorise ton avis. Suivez-nous sur les réseaux sociaux, visitez notre site www.channelafrica.co.za et préparez-vous à partager vos points de vue sur Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Jinsia unaharibu maisha na kutenga jamii. Hutokea nyumbani, shuleni, kazini na mara nyingi kwa ukimya. Lakini hauwezi kuendelea. Ukiona, ongea. Ikiwa unaumia, funguka, kwa sababu kutofanya lolote sio chaguo. Sikiliza vituo vyote 19 vya redio kuanzia Jumatano ya tarehe 23 Julai kwenye mijadala, ushauri, tamthilia, maonyesho ya elimu na mahojiano na wataalamu, manusura, watunga sheria na nchi nzima iliyoathirika na ukatili wa kijinsia kwenye vituo vyako pendwa vya redio. Piga simu 0800 428 428 ili kuripoti unyanyasaji au kupata msaada. GBV ikomeshwe na wewe. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na shirika la SABC.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
And now we tell you about a British-based aid group, Save the Children, warning that at least 4 African countries will run out of specialized life-saving food for severely malnourished children in the next 3 months. The organization says this is due to shortages caused by aid cuts, which have left supplies dangerously low in countries such as Nigeria, Kenya, Somalia, and South Sudan. Among the items most needed are high-energy biscuits, based plummy nut paste and other known treatments as ready-to-use therapeutic food. For more on this, we speak to Save the Children's East and Southern Africa Regional Director Yvonne Arunga, who joins us from Kenya. Yvonne, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. 4 countries, how many people are we looking at who are in danger of severe malnutrition?
Well, thanks for having me this evening. Well, we're talking about big populations, and it varies across the 4 countries that we've mentioned. So the most affected by the situation where there's shortages in RUTF is Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, and Kenya. So in Nigeria, for instance, we have 3.5 million children at risk, and we only have less than 64% of RUTF supplies secured. In Kenya, the stocks that we have ran out in October. And in Somalia, we are looking at 1.8 million children at risk. And in Somalia, we have less than 40% of the RUTF supplies secured. In South Sudan, we are talking about 714,000 children at risk and 15% of nutrition facilities closed. And these are just a subset of the countries affected. So if you look across the countries that we work in, including where we have major humanitarian situations like Sudan, etc., then the issue is severe.
And that's what I was thinking when you were giving out the figures now, that you speak of about 3.5 million children in Nigeria. Now, is that relative to population? Because we know Nigeria does have a large population compared, obviously, to the Sudan. Given the fact that the Sudan, there have been warnings for months of malnutrition because of the conflict, various reasons as well, and of course the collapse of health systems there.
Right, yes, so 3.5 million is the number of children affected in North and Northeast Nigeria. And I'm sure you'd agree with me that 3.5 million, irrespective of the base population size, is quite a big number of children to be facing, or to be, facing severe acute malnutrition.
No, absolutely. And this is why I'm surprised because, as I say, given the ongoing conflict in the Sudan, one would have thought that the number there would have been larger. So I'm quite surprised to hear of this huge number in Nigeria.
Well, South Sudan is the one that talked about 714,000 children. I haven't given figures for Sudan. Sudan is actually, because of the conflict in the country, has much higher numbers. I don't have the numbers off the top of my fingers for now. The figures that I was speaking to are the children that are under risk because of lack of access to the, therapeutic food, the RUTF.
Okay, so I think we are agreeing. Perhaps maybe you weren't quite understanding what I was saying, but I'm expressing surprise, obviously, because it's a very worrying situation. And we speak about the, official government aid that countries would ordinarily receive to mitigate some of these circumstances. So what is Save the Children hoping to do to mobilize for more funding from other sources? What remedies can be applied in the immediate term?
So to put it in context, maybe I'll speak to our broader work. So Save the Children, and in collaboration with local partners and in many instances with governments as well, across several countries, provides nutrition, clean water, health services, protection services to children and their communities. And usually we're working in communities that for a multitude of reasons are most cut off from basic services. And therefore placing a very big burden on families and children and leaving them at heightened risk of illness and hunger, exploitation, and preventable deaths. Now, with the recent cuts in aid funding, virtually all those sectors are affected. So let's, for instance, speak to nutrition, which is what we were, talking about, the therapeutic food and other interventions around nutrition. When children who, are undergoing, severe acute malnutrition do not have access to this RUTF, then their lives are actually under threat. And we know for a fact, of course, that children who are severely under malnutrition are also very, very vulnerable to other illnesses. And then not to speak to, of course, the issue about, the resourcing of our health work. There's been closure of clinics, and there's been also an impact on, health personnel or being able to fund our stabilization centers or, the provision of medicines and the like. So that has been also a real frustration for communities and also, again, making a bad situation worse. Then let's speak to education. Yeah, in very many places where we work, for instance, like in refugee camps, we run educational facilities. With the cuts in aid, those have had to be scaled back. And as you can imagine, you withhold or if children have no access to education, that hampers, their potential. and therefore has a lifelong effect. Not to speak of the protective effects that school have. So when children are in school, in quite a number of instances, they are safer. And then the clean water situation, or even access to water itself, when that's hampered, children and their families have to go to great lengths to secure that. And in the process of this, there's also protection risks, particularly for the girl children, on whom quite a lot of this burden falls. So these are just some of the ways in which communities are feeling the cuts in humanitarian aid.
And I'm sure this is something we'll continue to speak about as we end the year, because it's a serious situation growing even grimmer by the day in some countries. Thank you very much for your time. Save the Children East and Southern Africa Regional Director Yvonne Arunga.
Thank you.
The Midnight Snack.
Bye.
Okay, and it brings the time to exactly 15 minutes to 10. Now let's go to book review that I spoke about. In fact, you would have seen articles about it, you would have seen some interviews on it, and it's about remembering Babita Deokaran. So on the 23rd of August 2021, she was shot dead outside her home in Johannesburg, South Africa. A mother, a public servant, and a whistleblower, silenced because she exposed corruption. Investigative journalist Jeff Wicks followed her trial through stolen billions, political cover-ups, and the shadows of organized crime. And his new book, The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die, is part investigation, part tribute, and warning to South Africa, says Jeff Wicks. So we'll be speaking to him in just a moment to find out exactly what inspired the book, what have been the difficulties. Okay, I believe that Jeff Wicks is with us now. Jeff, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. I know you've just done 2 successive book launches in Johannesburg and Cape Town. What has been the general sentiment to the work that you've done?
I think, well, firstly, good evening, and thank you for having me. I think the popular consensus thus far, and that's having traveled between Johannesburg and Cape Town and met quite a few people who turned out to this launch, was shock. Because what Babita's story is truly a tale of woe, as concerns one woman who was gunned down brutally by 6 Izinkabi. And it's a tale of woe because of what she exposed at Timbiso Hospital, the depth and depravity of the corruption at that facility, which saw 2.3 billion rand extracted through dubious contracts in less than 2 years. And beyond that, the book is my own personal reflection on telling the story. And, I'm very grateful to everyone who came to me with information and risked their lives to help me tell the story.
And we'll get to some of the things that have been unearthed since, and the challenges she faced, you face in writing the book. But how did you balance, as you say, the evidence, the documentary aspect of writing the book, including your own responsibility of telling Babita's story? Because I believe you've actually become really close now to the family.
Yes, no, the second part of that first. I'm very grateful to Babita Deokaran's family for letting me in and giving me the privilege of telling the story. And truly, they were incredibly selfless in the way that they gave of their time. I mean, I spent hours with them just listening to their story and their stories of Babita, because it was very challenging to attempt to write a book or tell the story without understanding the person that I'm writing about, because I never had the privilege of meeting her. And beyond that, what the storyline is really underlined by is an unimpeachable trove of digital forensic evidence that we obtained through our investigation at News 24. And that digital evidence is drawn directly from Babita Deokaran's cell phone and her state-issued laptop, and it's a 60,000 email database that it held. And that helped us decode everything.
And you spoke about at some point you were saying if only you could get hold of the cell phone, but you had the laptop. Just take us through why that was important and what you found, because you mentioned the fact that before she was assassinated, she had been followed, there was witness statements of it, but that she had actually spoken out and said she's afraid not only for her life, but those who knew the information that she passed on.
So when Babita Deokaran was murdered, the motive for that crime was unknown, certainly to us, and I think as well to the police who were investigating it. And we got onto the story at News 24, and it was only 7 or 8 months later, after her murder, that we managed to get access to this laptop. And what it contained was all of her emails, and critically it was that report into Tembisa Hospital. And that was the one singular document which essentially got her killed, because in that she flagged 850 million rands worth of payments and called for a forensic investigation and tried to halt 100 million rands worth of outgoing payments. There's several days after she filed that report, she was murdered. And, you know, the import of that evidence for us was incredible, because our entire investigation, which has been running for 4 years now, and critically, it was evidence which was cast aside by the Hawks. When we examined these devices, we found out that they'd never been imprinted or mirrored by the police, as evidence should be, and they had essentially cast it aside.
Which is a different picture from what you say, the work that the police did, because you mentioned obviously there are 6 Inkabi that were arrested. So at some point there was a chasm. Have you found out what created that gap and why we are where we are now in terms of the family, you yourself still having questions? Because you said, you know, the killers are behind bars, but the masterminds are still out there free.
I think the central issue is critical missteps in the Hawks investigation. And, you know, when we were telling the story, we plot things on a timeline, and we could see that in the early stages of the investigation, when it was being handled by a provincial unit, a sharp group of cops, they made incredible successes within days. They were able to arrest the 6 Inkabi. They arrested 2 other men they linked to the getaway vehicle. And then the Hawks took over the case, and that was strange in it of itself, because the Hawks don't have a mandate to investigate murder unless it's the murder of a policeman. So the Hawks took charge and really just, you know, it made mistake after mistake. The central one, ignoring the digital forensic evidence, and then we later managed to uncover that one of the men that they ended up releasing inexplicably and against protocol, without examining his cell phone or anything else to do with his person, he was actually named as the one who pulled the trigger when his cohorts committed to a plea and sentencing agreement which saw them go to jail. And so we've now been 4 years since Babita Deokaran's death, and every year about this time around the anniversary, we take stock of where the investigation is. And what we've seen is essentially a cold case develop. The last time people were arrested in connection with Babita Deokaran's murder was 1,465 days ago. And I mean, that no one should be able to accept from law enforcement, which is meant to serve the people.
Which raises the question naturally is then who is shielding those behind bars and the one who got off free, so to speak. And in tandem, your book, the title is A Shadow State. So can you just expand a little bit more, because it obviously has to do with the trail that you've been able to follow and some of the speculation perhaps that you have?
Well, I think the shadow state is really a device to describe state capture. And that's what Babita found at Tembisa Hospital. And it's an entire illicit economy that prevents the state from being prosperous, because every tax rand is intercepted before it reaches its final destination. And what I mean by that is that contracts are inflated, or they are completely contrived in an extraction scheme like we saw at Tembisa, to end up benefiting a select group of very wealthy men, and men who happen to be incredibly politically connected. And the shadow state goes beyond that, because then there are those who enable these tenderpreneurs. There are the dubious car dealers, the real estate agents, the lawyers and the accountants who will help them cover their tracks. So that is the shadow state. So it's about extracting money from the state and then spending it for wealth and opulence and diverting it from its true intended destination, which are the sick and dying patients, desperately indigent individuals who call on Tembisa Hospital for medical care. And that's the crux of what this really is. And Babita laid down her life to expose that. And she left behind a teenage daughter, now a woman who is in university. And Babita missed her first day at university. She missed her passing her driver's license and her passing matric. So it's really an example of how corruption cannot ever be considered a victimless crime, because you're not simply a psychopathic individual stealing from a hospital because you think it has bottomless funds, but you took a person away from their family. And that's the cost of corruption personified by Babita Deokaran.
And I guess what I'm getting to more bluntly, Jeff, and I ask this question knowing that you may or may not be able to answer, given the danger that surely you yourself have faced and have been under the pressure. If you could also tell us a little bit more about it. But we know that there are obviously some very powerful people who are instigating running this parallel state. We know that people who lead procurement, people who also have their own political masters or principles, so to speak, are the ones who are benefiting or who are behind it. At this point, we know there was a state capture commission, but nobody's behind bars. Do we know definitively if these people are still running these departments, countries, or entities?
It's hard to say, but let me put it to you this way. So the SIU investigation into these contracts, and it's several thousand purchase orders that they're examining, worth 2.3 billion rand, has now spanned 4 years. At the end of that investigation, they will begin with civil litigation, and they can make recommendations to the NPA to prosecute for instances of fraud and bid rigging. And because that SIU investigation is not yet finished, those recommendations have not been made. And without those recommendations and a prosecution in situ, those suppliers cannot be blacklisted from doing business with the state. And we've seen as recently as two or 3 months ago, a key ANC politician in the saga, Selo Sekoko, the chair of the Ekurhuleni region of the now co-governing party, he had 3 companies in business with Tembisa Hospital. They were amongst the companies that Babita flagged for further investigation. And, you know, it appears that he took a bit of a break from public procurement, at least in the Gauteng Department of Health. But recently, as soon as 3 months ago, he was scoring tenders via the Gauteng Department of Health. And there are many more politically connected figures. But he's one of he's a rich example of what we're talking about when we speak about how politics and patronage and now procurement become completely intertwined with one another.
Obviously, there's been various changes made to the law here in South Africa to protect whistleblowers, but there have been experts, some legal and some political, who have poked holes in the draft of the law or the law itself. From what you know and have seen of the changes practically, including, as I mentioned, what you underwent, whistleblowers, and that includes investigative journalists like yourselves, is the law doing enough to protect them? And I'm also talking about the criminal justice system.
Well, frankly, no, the law is not doing enough, and that's because our legislation is out of date. And as you correctly say, we've seen draft bills, and we're expecting progress later this year. But you know, none of this has actually been realized action. It's simply been talk up to this point. And what we've seen since Babita Deokaran's death is several other assassinations, too many to count, actually. As recently as 3 months ago, in the Ekurhuleni region, in Pomafole, an auditor in that municipality was murdered, and he was the 3rd person in that role to be either shot at or shot and killed. So that tells you about how nothing has really changed. And then I must draw a distinction. Investigative journalists are by no means whistleblowers. You know, we choose this path, and it's completely different. And not to slight each's value, But, whistleblowers require certain protection. And, if I contrast myself with Babita Deokaran, she was lied to and betrayed and ultimately led to her death unwillingly. I understood what I was going into writing the story, and I did so with the full heft of my employer behind me, who gave me every support that they were able to give me.
And it's a very important thing to underscore, Jeff, just to cut in there, because I did want to ask the question that because you've spoken about being tailed, about being threatened, do you have a line that you would draw? I know you've challenged all of us. You said Babita stood for the truth and she was killed for the truth. Is there a point where you would feel that this is becoming a little too dangerous, despite all of the support that you've been getting?
Listen, of course there were times where I was scared. I think any normal person would be, and I think not being scared in a situation where your life and the lives of your loved ones are potentially under threat, that would make you an abnormal individual. So, of course, there were times where I vacillated, and luckily I had the support of my wife, who stood at my back through everything. And there was ultimately a realization that this was something that was bigger than me, and there was too much value that could be denied to the people of South Africa if we chose to stay silent. And beyond that, I don't like being cowed by people who threaten. And that's what these people want. They want to induce a silence by sending a message. And we cannot accept that. We have to stand against it. And I'm glad that the story was told, because in some ways we could have potentially saved the taxpayer 2.3 billion rand. And that was Babita Deokaran's sacrifice. So we have to advance it beyond just that. It has to be emblematic and symbolic in some way, even if it is advocation for whistleblowers. But from my perspective, it's pursuing everyone linked in these nebulous networks, because this investigation is ongoing and there's much more of the story to be told. And I truly believe that we're yet to fully grasp the true scale of these extraction networks and all their connections.
Well, we wish you all the best as you continue with that brave work. And thanks for taking the time to speak to us. Much appreciated. Jeff Wicks, who's written that book about Babita Deokaran, who has paid with her life, as he says. And he is saying, unfortunately, there is a cost to pay, and Babita Deokaran did pay for her integrity, for her truth, but saying that we shouldn't give up, that we should continue to protect truth tellers. Thank you very much, Jeff Wicks, speaking to us about that book that he's launched, just released. It's called The Shadow State, Why Babita Deokaran Had to Die. And that's how we end Africa World Hour this Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing and listening here on Channel Africa, and do enjoy the rest of your weekend as well. Up next is African Diaries with Shayla Ndikumana.